This evening, I take great pleasure in welcoming Neil Gillespie, who is the lead architect and director of Reiach and Hall Architects. And Neil's talk this evening is titled A Silent Witness. So without further ado, I'll pass you over to Neil. Okay, over to you, Neil.
Thank you, Jacqueline. I hope you can hear me, and I hope my voice bears up. I'm struggling with a bit of a cold. Um, I am sharing the screen, am I? You can see a silent witness, so we're all okay technically.
Yes.
It's a tremendous pleasure to be able to speak to you tonight on the Kilmartin Museum project, which I think started in our office in 2012. So it's been a long journey, and it's had many twists and turns, and I'd really like to take you through that journey if I may, and hopefully you'll find it interesting. First of all, I'd like to thank Kilmartin Museum for commissioning us, to the Board of Trustees and its many guises over those many years, to Grace MacLeod, the chair, and particularly a thank you to Dr. Sharon Webb, who was there right at the very beginning with me. I think we're the only two that have been on it right the way through. So without more ado, what I'd like to do is take you through a few themes which may feel a little bit esoteric, but hopefully they'll begin to explain some of the forms and some of the moments in the museum that you'll see as part of a longer story, if you like. So a silent witness, and I'll explain that as we go on. What is architecture? I'll start with architecture as opposed to building. And architecture is an ancient, I daren't call it an art, but an ancient discipline. And I love this image by Utamaro of a young girl looking at her reflection in a mirror. So the reflection is her, but it's not her. She's in the real world and her reflection somewhere else. And architecture is a bit like that. It's very much in the real world of building, but it's also in the world of ideas. And this Chinese philosopher said that art is something that lies in the slender margin between the real and the unreal. So there's the reality of the physical presence, but there's also something more to do with imagination. And another way of explaining that is to do with vertical thinking and horizontal thinking. I told you I was going to get heavy, but vertical thinking really is like tradition. It's really about existing patterns. It's about repetition. It's about application. It's about discipline. It's what you understand your every day-to-day life to be. Horizontal or lateral thinking is thinking beyond that. And again, architecture is a balance between the two. It's about working with things we know, but it's also about trying to imagine something else. And the image on the right looks like dawn on the North Sea or something, but it's actually ice blink. An ice blink is light reflecting off an ice shelf beyond the horizon. So you think you know what you're looking at, but you actually don't until you go out there and explore. And so we always, in our practice, we're always thinking about patterns of living and making, particularly building in a traditional sense, but we're also thinking of new things, innovative things, perhaps. This next image is on the left-hand side is a plan. It's a path, and it's in Chile by a wonderful landscape architect called Teresa Muller. And what I'm trying to suggest with this image is that, and there's a quote there that basically says, when someone leaves his house, he cannot move as he wishes, as bound by certain predetermined possibilities. In other words, architecture isn't about just having an idea and building it. It's about you encounter issues and problems as you move through very difficult territory, and I'll touch on that. Finance, for example. And what Teresa Muller's path does, it shifts direction as she moves through this rocky shoreline in Peru. And ultimately, it's not a straight line. It's a difficult path. And I think the story of the Kilmartin Museum was particularly difficult. I'll be honest about that. We had COVID, we had all sorts of things happening, enormous rises, increases in material costs because of COVID. And the board and the project team had to address these and shift our thinking constantly. So that's really what that little image was about. The next one is starting to get a bit more personal, and this is me on the left-hand side there holding a salmon in about 1966. So you can tell I'm no spring chicken, but and I think it's really just to say that through my father and family, the landscape has always been a recurring theme in my thinking and in the work of the practice, a certain kind of work in the practice. Books by Neil Gunn, particularly an essay in Landscape and Light about the Highland, the void, that huge space that you will know all too well in Kilmartin. And that can be a difficult kind of space for many people. And the image on the right is by my brother, and he's the little guy on the shorts. He's an old man as well now, but anyway. So we've always had this sense of this void and the sense of space that Scotland abounds in. And the quote I think, is very close to my heart, and it says that, like the Japanese, the Celts were always quick to take an artistic hint. They avoid the obvious and commonplace. The half-said thing to them is dearest. So I'm going to break that rule and blether a little bit tonight. But the half-said thing about saying something simply and in as few words as possible is the kind of architecture that we enjoy. And Neil Gunn again. Neil Gunn was very influenced by this Chinese painter on the left, or Japanese, Sesshu Toyo, and he was expert in what was called broken ink landscape, where the pieces of the painting that are unpainted are as important as the pieces that are painted. So this sort of sense of space comes from the gap rather than the piece. And there's a lot of aspects of the Kilmartin Museum which are about emptiness, which I'll come to. And in Japan, there is a phrase for this, mono no awari. It's about emptiness, solitude, stillness. And there's a certain sadness about spaces that have that. And there's a beautiful phrase, an eloquent silence. So the eloquence of saying nothing is really very powerful in, I think, in contemporary work, certainly in the tradition of Japanese architecture. And hopefully there's some of that in the Kilmartin Museum. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to run through some of our previous projects to put it in the context, because all buildings have a legacy and a history back to previous work and hopefully work in the future. And this image, it's not a very good image, but it's the best I could get, is of a Peruvian bracelet. And each piece on the bracelet, a little bit of rock, a piece of bone, a bead, was stored. It was a memory of the calendar year. And the elder who had this bracelet could reflect on the whole year by recalling the pieces of the bracelet. And what happens, I think, in architecture, certainly talking about architecture, is you start to go back over previous work and you polish them. You're constantly touching them and thinking about them. So to start that off, a project that we did a number of years ago was for the Pier Arts Centre in Stromness in Orkney. And that building was about a renovation of the building with its lights on, a warehouse building, a very beautiful building, which contains an amazing collection, an unbelievable collection from the 19s and 50s and 60s. And our building is the building immediately behind it, the new extension. So it's about tradition, that vertical thinking, and innovation, the new building. And they both respect each other. And this building was about, during the day, the new building is very quiet. It's saying very little. But as the light fades, as it does in Orkney quite quickly in the day, the new building is semi-transparent. It starts to be lit from within. So this is a late afternoon in Stromness in the winter. So that the building transforms from one form into another, and suddenly you see a different perspective on the work. So that's always been a powerful building in our portfolio. The image on the left is Orkney from Caithness, and Caithness is the flow country, half water, half solid. And a project that we did there a few years ago was concerned with, it was an archive for Caithness, and it was an archive for the nuclear industry. And these were my sketches, and I was thinking that when you cut a hole like you do on a beach, you create a hole and it fills up with water, but you also create a mound. So the idea was that the building could be made out of something cut out of the ground, if you like. That was the concept. And this was our model of it. Directly straight up and down is north. The building is canted to tie in with the field pattern. So it's a combination of something to do with orientation, but also to do with the local condition. And it became this, it was an aluminium building, which catches the light. So sometimes it's orange, sometimes it's grey, sometimes it's blue. It reflects the sky. And right through the middle of this building are three triangular lock-ins, so that they start to mirror the building, and they too change dramatically as the light changes. So this is early evening, I think. No, this is dawn. And then at night, it becomes a very different thing altogether. So this kind of transformation of a building was interesting to us, and this relationship to landscape. This is a building that I'm working on at the moment in Bewley, and it's for a watchmaker who was an ex-student of mine who gave up architecture, which might have been a good move, and started making very high-end watches. And this is a studio just outside Bewley. And the idea here was you can start to see that triangle that's come from the previous building I've just shown you. There's a gap in this wall which breaks through to a fire. And then on the other side is a deck and a series of rooms sitting in this kind of Inverness landscape, forest landscape. These are some of the images the office does of fox there. And you'll also see this circular motif, the watch, and the idea of time and the circle. And again, this will be a reference to Kilmartin here. But the triangle refers to many things. And we put in this skein of geese in the sky there. These triangles are very much part of our landscape, mountains, trees. And then a building we've just finished in Edinburgh called the Fruit Market Gallery. This was a discovering of an old warehouse. We painted everything black. And it's got this very memorable, slightly sad space. So, a silent witness, what did that mean? There's a thought really that, and this is a very famous painting by Giovanni Mansueti, The Miracle of the Holy Cross. And it just occurs to me that the buildings themselves look as if they're watching the activity that's going on. So that buildings are party to a history. So your own house will have seen perhaps many families live there. And does the building retain that kind of energy? I think it does. And it seems to me that buildings are these witnesses to the act of human frailties and human passions and human successes. And the buildings really are just vessels for people to live out their lives. So this is moving directly now into Kilmartin. And this is a German painter, Caspar David Friedrich, and his paintings are always about loss, about death, and this idea of landscape and loss. And a building that we did just predates Kilmartin was the Bannockburn Visitor Centre, which was, there are no artifacts, there are no marks left of the battle, unlike Kilmartin, which is hugely rich in the marks left by prehistory. All we know is there's a story that a battle happened here, thousands died, and so we were designing a visitor centre to that event. And this aerial view shows what we took was two lines in the landscape. One is centered on Edward's Approach, which is the top line, and the other one is the local boundary. And that gave rise to a building which opened up to the battlefield and recognized the route and the local context. The building became a story about a building and a courtyard. And at the centre of the courtyard was a void. And as we get on to Kilmartin, we'll see we've used the same idea but reversed it. So that's our model. I won't go through the building, but there's a courtyard at its centre. The roof tiles recall chain mail. Brick pattern, again, you'll recognise the brick. The idea of using brick to suggest texture and pattern. And again, it's a building that's purposefully not easy on the eye. The battle, it wasn't a jolly event. It was a horrendous event. And so our building tries to suggest the seriousness of the site with a courtyard at the centre and the reenactment of the battlefield. So on to Kilmartin Glen. And Kilmartin Glen is a remarkable place, absolutely remarkable. And these are pages from our competition entry. Initially, there was an open competition to design the building, and we prepared a little booklet. And in it, we tried to understand the importance of the Glen and the number of prehistory sites. And on the right-hand side, we became obsessed by the cup and ring marks. This idea that you create an indelible mark in the landscape that's there thousands of years later, it's still traceable, seemed to us to be really, really incredibly powerful. But they were incredibly modest as well. The cairn itself, again, what we became fascinated by was the idea of the stone kist, and I started to read the kist as rooms rather than a bigger scale. And the cairn is something which wrapped round the kist and protected it. And then in the centre of this kist is a pot, but the pot by its very nature is a very ordinary vessel. Obviously, when I mean ordinary, I mean it's made of clay and it's formed by hand. Obviously, I still can't believe that these objects have survived those thousands of years, and this ordinary object is now of immense value and so precious. So we were thinking of something inside something else. The linear symmetry, this line and the cairns which line up, again became something we thought about a great deal. And the other thing we were interested in was, I don't know if Sharon's on the call, but archaeology is by its nature a kind of aggressive act. You're kind of opening up things to find things. And one of this Kathleen Jamie quote, which I really love, is, "For 5,000 years we have used darkness as the metaphor for our mortality. We have not banished death, but we have banished darkness." There's always this sense that we have to always switch a light on or make everything visible or explainable. And I think what I really enjoy as I get older is our shadows. about things that are inexplicable, maybe things I don't understand. And so what we thought was would be great, and a thing to do might be to put the pots back into the darkness. Rather than flooding them with light, put them back into the shadow. Um, the site itself, Kilmartin House, there's a conversation, if you like, between the white building and the church, which we began to become interested in. I mean, the kirk is kind of reticent, quieter, more dignified, probably. And there's a book by an author called Daniel Maudlin, and he talks about the Highland House transformed and talks about the social and political um, implications of those white houses in the Highland Glens. It was all about, I'm sure you will all know this, about the Enlightenment and about the Improvement Act, which expelled the crofters from the land and brought in the tenant farmer. And so the white building in the Glen was a highly political and social act that demonstrates who was in charge. And we were kind of interested in that because these were kit houses. These were kit houses that came from the lowlands rather than something which came from Argyll itself. So there was a conversation there about the white building in the landscape, but there was also the steading, which of stone and its relationship to the village. So we started to explore ideas looking at a traditional Scottish castle and how does a castle expand in the past. You get on the right hand side there, you've got the keep, and then it starts to get more contemporary extension to it. A more absolutely beautiful expression of that Corgarth Castle, where you've got the original town fortified house in the centre, and then this carapace of new building round it. And that became our idea. So these are my sketches. So on the left-hand side, you've got four things. You've got the glebe cairn to the bottom. You've got the church to the right. You've got the steading to the left, and in the middle, you've got our diagram of a cairn with the manse as the kist. So the idea was the manse would be, as a conceptual idea, in the centre of a new building, and we would wrap a new building around the manse. And this was the first scheme. And then, so you've got the manse on the left, it gets wrapped in a building, and then the building's form responds to the trees, to the boundary lines, etc. So it starts to adjust. And it does that in section too, because we're falling down a hill. The manse in the centre and the museum navigating the topography, if you like. And the idea of objects sitting in a window. Because what is amazing about Kilmartin is that the artefacts in the museum were found in the glebe cairn immediately outside the window. So could we make that connection? I'll speed up here, I think. So that scheme we worked on for quite a while, and it was very ambitious. And you can see the steading on the left, the manse in the centre, and the new museum with its education suite temporary galleries wrapped around the old manse. And it was on 2 levels, sections. That was our model of it. And these were our images of it. The white building wrapped with a new building, entrance from the steading, temporary galleries, view down the glen. However, our first big heartache was Heritage Lottery didn't support the ambition of that scheme. They supported the scheme, but not at that scale. And so there was a hiatus, and we had to rethink. We had to save a huge amount of money. And this John Ruskin quote, I think, is really opposite. He says, "What is most musical will always be found the most melancholy. No real beauty can be obtained without a touch of sadness. whenever the beautiful loses its melancholy, it degenerates into prettiness. And I think that, so I think that the pain that we went through in redesigning the building somehow reflects itself in the building that's left. We were different and the building was different. We were going through COVID, we were going through all sorts of things, and it was a difficult period for the board to manage and to survive, I think. So this one, we go back to the scheme, and if you recall the Bannockburn one of the two lines on the landscape, that we've got the linear symmetry which we've talked about, but the other line is north-south. So that goes back to that Wick scheme, the idea of north-south being a lodestone, an orientation line. These became the two generating lines for the idea. And this is a diagram of it. Sorry, I've had to turn it through 90 degrees because of the format of the drawing. But north-south is through the middle of the page. And then you've got the linear symmetry, which is at 20 degrees to north. And the building geometry that you discover within the building as we go through it, I must show you some photographs. All of the angles that you see in the museum relate to that 20 degrees off north and to the linear symmetry. So column shapes, ramp shapes, wall, alignment of wall, all reflect something outside the building. I hope this is making sense. And then there was the view from the building to the glebe cairn. And the basis of the circulation of the building is a route that runs through the building north-south. You see it there, that circulation spine from the steading through the entrance, through the temporary galleries to the museum. That's north-south. So at the lowest level, we have the conservatory on the left, then the collection space, then the laboratory spaces, and then the education suite. Moving up, in the centre we have the entrance and that big collection space, that gestural space, the circle. And the circle really is about the cup and ring, but it's also a memory of a sycamore tree that was on the site at that point. So it's about the diameter of the sycamore tree. But it's also a kind of gesture which is friendly. It's kind of a hug, if you like. It's a kind of embracing people as they come in to the museum. The manse itself becomes the temporary gallery space, and the new museum space wraps round to the east. And I suppose the big move or the big idea on the plan was that as you enter, there is a glazed screen, and you can look out and you can see the cairn. But at that moment, you don't understand what you're looking at. As you go through the museum and the story unfolds, you get a very similar window, and you look back at the cairn, but this time you know something. And then as you move up through the manse, you're into offices all the way up to the top. Section through the entrance with the collection store below. Section through the museum with the education suite below, looking out to the landscape. So the education suite and its connection to the cairn was really critical, so that when someone is teaching young people, the objects are really outside the window. A general section. So this was a early computer rendering. We've taken the trees away so we can see the building. This is for planning. You'll see the two glazed sections either side of the manse. This was the entrance at that time. Originally, it was going to be white brick. Moving towards the entrance, the steading, that space that gathers people together, a place to sit and have a cup of tea. And you'll see the motif of the circular window, which refers to many of our other buildings. But the idea really was to create what we call a gesture, a mark that was slightly unusual. So the cantilevered corner there is purposely trying to be slightly provocative, so that you're drawn to the entrance and the glazed window. And then at night, the shop and the entrance, the view through to the steading itself, the education suite on the lower level. This is the entrance looking towards the entrance. These are the early drawings up to the temporary gallery through to the museum. At this stage, there's no interpretation designers involved, so we are leaving them with this void, a timber roof, which we took the render off the old manse so that we're back to a very basic wall. And you can see that the timber roof is supported off the manse. So the manse is not only surrounded, but the manse is the thing that supports the museum. And we travel round the manse until we get to the end and we see out into the landscape again. The T column is very important to us. It's important on a number of levels. It supports the roof, supports the two main beams. On the left-hand side is a very famous church in Sweden by a great hero of mine, Sigurd Leverance, and it's a steel cross. It's a church. So we're referring back to history, modern history and architecture. This is from the 60s, and we're acknowledging his genius. But what the T shape represents is the figure. It represents a person in this space. So it's people supporting the roof. It's people supporting the culture. So that column is, from our perspective, very, very important. There was meant to be there was at one point a circular window in the gable, which we lost, sadly. But it was going to be about an individual placing themselves in the landscape. That's that. So then we started to build, and building is a even more aggressive archaeology. It was a difficult site. It involved some dramatic digging here. You'll see the underpinning of the steading on the right-hand side in concrete to stop it falling down. And that was really to create the space that enabled the building to present a very modest scale to the village, so that it was very low, so that we had to go into the ground to make the store. So here's an aerial view of the manse surrounded by the museum, the church and the steading, and the village beyond. The manse itself. And we started to think about materials. So that the material that we've used is a brick. It's a very beautiful brick. It's from Denmark. It's called Peterson brick, and it's one of the best bricks in the world. And we felt that the material that we made it of should have longevity, should be robust. And the brick is horizontal when it's on a straight wall, and when it goes into a curved wall, we turn it through 90 degrees so it can curve easily. If I go back, no, I don't think it's the next one. And the concrete bench is that place where people can gather either before or after they've been into the museum, where groups of kids, and it's also where stories could be told. It's a gathering spot. But as I said, it reflects the cup and ring mark, but it was also the site of a tree. And the drama of the cantilever corner. What we were doing there was recognizing the height of the steading in the scale of the aperture at the entrance. So what you get is the scale of the steading comes into the new building in terms of the height from ground to eaves. So you get a dimension there that's equal on the new building and on the old building. So it's that kind of recognition of each other, but they are very different. They recognize that one's new and one's old, but they understand each other. And there, of course, there was opening day when that's what that space was about. And a more dramatic light there. And the circle really is about it's about recognizing that seeing into the entrance, and it's about an invitation, really. It's a bit wet on that one. But just really enjoying the texture of the vertical meeting the horizontal and the brick coming in there. Nicely made. And then on entering, you see through the building. So what we were always aware of through Sharon and Erin was this connection between the museum and the landscape. It was always about trying to get people to go out into the landscape. So as you enter, you see the cairn, but you're not really aware of its significance at that point. But it's also a place where you could just take a breather. You maybe been in the car for a while, so you need a generous space there that you can think about whether you should go for a coffee, go to the loo, go to the shop, or go to the museum, whatever order you want to go in. So you need a bit of generosity there. The structure of the roof is the structure of the wall. So there's the sense of the roof coming to bear on the ground there. And that's from the shop. And the steading, which we enjoyed. And again, it's about human scale spaces. The columns, when you go back, you'll see that the columns are chamfered because they're picking up that 20-degree line I was talking about. And then you move round. So where the curve externally was about gathering people together and being a kind of friendly act, you're on the opposite curve when you come into the museum now, and that's to move you. So rather than pausing, the curve moves you through into the main space. And we had to do a series of very slow ramps to move from the entrance level up to the level of the ground floor of the manse. So that does that gradually, but Sharon and the team brilliantly used that change in level as a signification of when the museum changes from kind of modern history, if that's the way to put it, into the prehistory. So that it's significant in terms of the interpretation. There's the column, which is bearing the weight of the roof, and that's represents the idea of man and that toil. And then you're starting to move around, and you're starting to get a view of the landscape again, so you're drawn to that. I'll just go through these quickly, almost finished. Until you get to that hugely significant moment when the pot from the glebe cairn is in a position where you can see both it and the cairn where it came from. I think that's a really significant moment. And looking back to the young woman, and then moving out of the museum into the temporary gallery spaces. This is looking at it from the glebe cairn, and that this has really just introduced the below ground activities. So you've got the learning centre with the lab spaces in the existing manse building, the collection store. This was photographed obviously when it was empty. Very stable construction in terms of environment through its massive construction. That's sitting underneath the shop in the entrance. And then the education suite, which is sitting underneath the main museum space. And again, it's got that view back to the glebe cairn as that critical connection. And that's it. Lets me go through it. And obviously it's all about the cairn and the monuments and the artifacts. And so I leave you with that. I hope that was interesting.
That was great. Thank you very much, Neil, for that. That was excellent.